So we have Aliyyah Eniath and Nathalie Taghaboni here. We're going to be talking at length about their novels. But initially, I'm going to invite both of them to read a little bit from their novels. So Aliyyah, would you mind reading first? I'll just introduce Aliyyah. Aliyyah was born in Trinidad and Tobago, and her ancestors hailed from Uttar Pradesh in India. She's the director of Safari Publications, a magazine publishing house, and the founder and editor-in-chief of Bell Weddings. The Yard is a debut novel, which she calls a literary romance. It's published by Speaking Tiger Books, and it explores the ideas of breaking free from boundaries, family and otherwise. It is set in a family compound in Trinidad, and it looks at strict religious ideologies and begs for a softer approach. So please welcome Aliyyah Eniath.
Thanks, everyone. So here's chapter 2 of my novel. It's called The Yard. Aunt Livy lay frozen in bed. She could hear, see, and think, but her body refused to move. The vagabond boy was there again beside her bedding on the floor. Who was he? Where did he come from? This time, a white smile was splashed across his dark face. His hair was way too long, way too slick, his face gaunt. He was tormenting her, saying he was going to kill all her chickens. He will chop their heads off, blood will splatter everywhere, and when he was done, he'd wring her neck and pluck her head off too. She awoke suddenly. Her bones creaked painfully against the concrete floor as she pulled her body upwards. The thin white sheets crinkled beneath her. They were layered with scraps of cloth, some piled higher than others, pressed against her most sensitive areas. The boy had invaded her dreams 5 nights in a row. Now she feared sleep. The night before, he was a rascal looking in from the window. Shh, he hissed. It's only a matter of time. Only in real life, there were no windows. Despite her maladjusted sleep and subsequent distress, she set to work the following morning selling bundles of red hot peppers that, against all odds, had sprouted in the clay squatting yard. Pain shot through her joints with every movement. Osteoarthritis, the doctor had said, warning that she'd be completely bedridden before long. She scoffed at the idea. She would not be in a position to accept pity from anyone. She'd fend for herself like she always did. A couple meandering along the dirt road, hand in hand, on their way to deeper, more isolated territory, stopped to buy 2 fresh bundles, which she sold for $1 each. Hours later, a man and his young son stopped by. The boy watched her in alarm while his father made a show of creating his own bundle, picking out the best ones, only to decide that he did not need any after all. At the end of the day, she was only a couple of dollars richer. The sky was red when Aunt Livy returned to the shack. She slid against the wall and eased herself into her bedding. For once, her unruly bones cooperated. She patted the floor, reaching for a banana she had stored nearby. The fruit was from her nephew, the one they called Father Khalid, who dropped by every Friday after the Juma prayer. She did not encourage his visits. In fact, she was apt at showing her displeasure. Each time he came around, she'd work herself into a frenzy. She'd bawl at him to leave her alone, shriek at him to take his groceries packaged with guilt to someone else. But recently, she'd been so starved that she was secretly grateful he'd left the food by the door anyway. She gobbled the banana, tossing the peel aside, and lay down on her side. Her body grew weaker with the blackening sky. Soon she was immobile. Any attempt to sit up or roll over was met with sharp, jabbing pains across her torso and down her thighs. To rise seemed more painful than to die. She closed her eyes and drifted away, and the nightmares resumed. The boy was sitting cross-legged on the floor of a one-room boardhouse eating fruit. Her fruit. Thief, rascal, just waiting for her to die so he could rob her of everything. Angered by her tongue lashing, he pried open her pliable mouth with rough fingers. He was stuffing something down her throat, her windpipe bulging in protest, making her gulp and gasp for air. "Aye," she cried out, get out my house." She heard his laughter ring out in response and covered her ears. Her body's feelings incensed her. How was she to fight this devil?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. And so next we'll read Nathalie Taghaboni. Nathalie is well known here for her 3 books set in Trinidad, which is called the Savanoy series. The first is called Across from La Perouse, the second, Santi Manite, and the third, which was published last year, was called Side by Side We Stand, and it was launched recently here in Port of Spain. Very well-attended launch. Many of you have read Nathalie's books, so with that, Nathalie, please go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Tuesday came all too soon. The household woke at 6 a.m., had a big breakfast, and left for the camp. By 8:30, the harnesses and frames of the king and queen of nature of man were prepped and waiting on Arapita Avenue in front of Adam Smith Square. The morning was made for Mass. The sky was an unnameable shade of blue found only on an artist's palette after she had daubed this with that. Tufts of clouds here and there angled for the best view of the happenings below. Rain had fallen the night before, clearing the air, softening the heat. Droplets of water shimmered like diamonds on rooftops and gates. It was as if Mother Nature decided, well, if priests could play Mass, who's me? She had tidied and prettied and fluffed. In the camp, the artisans moved with single-mindedness. The smell of fabric and paint wafted through the area. Glitter, dust lay like an enchantment on everything and everyone. Masqueraders, fresh from a good night's sleep, lined Carlos Street as Geneva and Kenneth came out of the camp and headed up to the avenue to be strapped in. The trucks were set. The trombones and trumpets used the breeze to carry a message that the band was ready. Color found like color. Get in your section. The rules of Mass was in place. They rounded the corner at Besson Street near the police station. This was the station at which Carlton Savanoy Sr. and Jr. first served. Cadets lined the pavement, standing at ease as the band paused there to prepare to parade before the judges on Piccadilly Street. The commanding officers came through the crowd to salute the king and the queen, marking their respect for the late Commissioner Savanoy. The bleachers ahead were packed, the pavement crowded. Word had traveled that the Savanoy Mass was making its way past one of the original viewing points to the city, and people came down the hill from Lavant Hill to watch. A community banner flapped and waved over the street. Piccadilly, birthplace of the carnival. Geneva's sons were ready, settled into a costume that was folded at the edges to allow it to make its way through the tiny street and around that hairpin bend. Her dancers were in place, wrapped within the fabric. Geneva's hair was pinned back, and she sported a wig of flowing multicolored tresses that streamed into the folds of the costume's skirt. Half her face was hidden behind a black mask fashioned to mold to her face. The other half of her face was painted in colors reflecting the rainbow. She was just behind the first music truck. As the band rounded the corner onto Piccadilly Street, the truck moved to the side, stopping across the street from the judges. A revered calypso artist stood up and took the mic. The brass band quieted for a moment before the song began. The audience's response was immediate and overwhelming when they heard a cappella. Now they address me as Her Majesty. They say my music sweet, it make for the pants to beat. It have the sway to jump on Carnival Day. The brass taking the load, they call me Queen, 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 Her Majesty, Queen of the Road. I don't know I can sing. The singer was roundly applauded, the applause echoing across East Dry River as the brass band picked up the melody. A younger soca artist, familiarly known as the Queen of Bacchanal, joined in a duet. This was Geneva's cue to come into view. She came forward at a graceful pace, curtsying to the Calypsonians on the truck who waved back to her and blew kisses. Geneva turned to address the audience. The crowd and all 7 judges rose to their feet. It is one thing to be in costume and play mass. You know what is expected of you. You have paid the cost of the work and are part of the presentation. But the crowd, too, has a vital part to play. It has unwritten rules. It must understand its own importance. It must accept the duty to respect the artistry and reward the effort. Carnival is not a departure from responsibility. On the contrary, it is full, vivid acknowledgement of it. A performance without an audience is merely self-indulgence. Carnival is a theater on a massive scale in the streets of the city. The audience owes the obligation to allow the drama to unfold unrestricted and to respond with applause so loud, so sustained, as to awaken the mass ancestors. The rainbow people, the people of the nature of man, the Savanoy Band, were the people of the land, that country, the ethnic mixes whose diversity reflected every human group known throughout the world. Wave after wave of masqueraders danced past, depicting the African, Indian, European, Mid and Far Eastern roots. All the masqueraders carried standards, those long sticks with strips of ribbon that were once the carnival norm, but have been abandoned in most recent years. As sections 2, 3, and 4 passed, Geneva stayed center stage. They circled her twice like an unfolding cosmos. The king was approaching. The queen bowed and moved on, following her people onto Prince Street. Accompanied by the music truck, perpetual motion danced onto the center stage. Another older calypsonian was seated on the truck. A younger soca artist, known simply as Boy, stood next to him. The older man waved and the band struck up. His strong, legendary voice rang across the music. They keep saying I am dead, but not today. Hooday, hooday-oh. The crowd responded. The king began his performance, accompanied by more of the rainbow people. Dancing around him in a counterclockwise motion. Kenneth was dressed in blue tights, his torso painted white and blue. The crowd was beside themselves by the time the last wave came through. That section had 20 masqueraders from each of the previous 11 sections, with fabric connecting each of them to each other as they snaked past. They were a melting pot of pieces and fragments of ancestry, cultures mixed together. Asian pagoda art, African mass, bagpipes slashed together with totem poles, Vedic symbols lashed onto Mayan pyramids. The nature of man told its story.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure hearing writers read, because when you read, I've read both these scenes from your books in my head, in my own way, and the writing just lifts off the page when you hear writers writing their own work in their own voice. I wanted to start by asking a very straightforward question. This panel is called Family Ties, and with both these books, the reader is given very close proximity to, in your case, one large extended family, and in your case, 2 very interwoven families.
Right.
Your families feel very auspicious, almost like the first families of Trinidad. One of them contains a famous singer, a prime minister,
right,
etc., commissioner of the police. So
right,
you're writing families that are obviously fictional, but they feel very, very, very alive. And you're giving us a rare insight into an Indo-Muslim family who also live in a yard behind closed doors. It's a very rare insight. So the reader gets very involved with these families. And Nathalie has also written 3 books, so your families have stayed with the reader for a long time.
That's right, yes.
So my first question is, how much is fact and how much is fiction with these families? And so Nathalie.
Well, let's see if there's any of my family in the audience before I answer that question. The story is made up of everyone I have ever known. Whether I have mixed and matched, and some of the characters are purely one person, some are bits and pieces of other people. to maintain their guilt or innocence. But none of it is fiction.
Okay.
But it isn't always my facts.
Okay.
So I'm not relating my particular family story. I'm relating the stories of as many families as I've come across over my entire lifespan of over years.
Okay. So there's been some disguising and some creative,
Lots of disguising.
some creative
Yes.
imagining
Yes.
and repurposing and recycling.
Right. So any one person is made up of several characters
Sure.
that I've come across
Okay.
in my life.
Yeah, which is interesting because the families feel so credible. They feel so
Yes.
like they're in my DNA of understanding as well. So
Yes.
all that weaving's worked.
Exactly.
Works as
Exactly.
magic.
That was the whole plan. I'm glad it worked.
It does, it does. And I want to talk a little bit later about some of the risks you take as well
Oh,
with your
dear.
family. Aliyyah, tell me more about your family, the Ali family, fact and fiction. Yeah.
Well, my mother is not in the room, so and she does not make an appearance in this book at all, just so you know. But this book is part fiction, but also based on real life, because it's set in Freeport in central Trinidad, and not a lot of books are. In fact, I don't know any other book that is fully set in that location. And I'm drawing from history because this family is a close-knit East Indian Muslim family in Trinidad. And Muslims are 5% of our population. And this family lives in an enclosed yard where all the aunties and brothers and sisters live together, but in their separate houses. But everyone's together all the time in each other's business, and there's a code of living that is real to a society like that. And even though you may live in Trinidad, you may not have that insight what that feels like. And my father actually grew up in a community like that, and I was always fascinated by the way they lived. And they were a very, very nice family, but I could just imagine how I would feel surrounded by aunties and uncles and cousins 24/7. Like, I love my aunties and uncles, but it's one community. And how do you deal with that when you all have to abide by certain rules and a certain code of living? And how do you, if you don't want to follow those rules, and if you don't necessarily have the belief systems of everyone else around you, how do you break free of that? It's so much more difficult with that geography and with that intimate sort of living. And when perhaps you alone think differently, and then you question yourself, why do I think this way and no one else around me does?
I want to just interrupt because I felt that, first of all, I agree. I was thinking, I don't think I've ever read anything like this. And you also name-check A House of Mr. Biswas early on, that the girls are reading it. And it's interesting that it's such a different book. It's not even anywhere in the same ballpark. But so again, I felt a privilege that it was a rare world that you were talking about. And again, there's this world within a world. The yard is a confine. It's a confined world within a society, Trinidad, which is a lot more tolerant. And so you have this doubling up of, and then, there's lots of rules in this world, but the two people who, like all the women marry out. There's Edward, there's Beirut, there's Ron, they all marry out. I wanted to talk about the fact that both books are love stories. And I've always had a personal gripe about Caribbean fiction, that there isn't enough writing about love, because obviously this pulls in a lot of opportunity for conflict. And both of you write about love really, really well. And you also, in doing so, you touch upon all kinds of areas of conflict. Could you talk a little bit about some of the love partnerships in your book? In particular, VJ and Geneva, all of them. Carlton and Gloria, Carlton and Helen.
I grew up reading Harlequin romances, Mills and Boons. It was boy meets girl. They had this conflict. They went this way and that, and then they ended up together at the end. And I thought, well, we do that too. So how come there aren't any stories about us doing that? Boy will meet girl. Mommy don't like the girl. His mother don't like the girl. Their families don't like each other. Comments start. They went that way. They went that way. And we don't always end up, with little Mozart playing in the back and everybody around with the hair flowing, a long maraca speech, and everything is nice and neat. We have a lot of comments in between. And I wanted to read more of that. I wanted to understand how we love. We love in full color. We cuss you today, love you up tomorrow.
Yeah.
I don't like you, but I'm still going to cook for you. I'm still going to iron your shirt. The children strip it like you, but, I wanted to get all of that on the page.
And you certainly do. I mean, I think you've captured the natural conflict of gender imbalances,
Right.
race, what it brings if you marry somebody from a different background.
Yes.
Men and women, the dynamic, in a very Trinidadian vernacular. I mean, there's tons going on in
Yes.
your books, a
Yes.
lot. It's very complicated.
Every page.
Everything.
Yes.
And in particular, you touch upon difficult, dark relationships as well.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, and in particular, so for example, Gloria Maldonado, who is a sort of, has been driven mad, or maybe she is mad, or in this family there is madness or badness. She has a very, very inappropriate relationship with her father.
Correct.
Can you talk about why you took us there? Because it's such a hot topic that I think Trinidad in general is only coming to grips with, which is domestic abuse, child abuse,
Yes.
things like this within families.
We have a habit of not discussing the elephant in the room. And to this end, the elephant becomes bigger as far as I'm concerned. It does not disappear. So what I hope to do in these pages was, yes, the carnival and all the rest of it is nice and pretty, but there are some ugly sides to us that we do need to discuss. And it's a fiction book, so we feel a little safer.
Yes, yeah.
The Savanoy family is fictional, so it's okay for me to read about this without thinking that I'm exposing something or someone. It feels a little bit more comfortable to open that conversation. So you've read the book and you've come across this business of incest, and now it is okay to get online in a book group or something and start that conversation.
Yeah.
It's okay now. It's just a fictional character. But in the meantime, you're now getting answers to some of your own personal questions.
Yeah, sure. So in a way, you're opening up a conversation that is really still quite a silent.
Yes.
It's a silent subject. It's a
Yes.
sleeping subject here.
Yes. And it is huge.
Yeah. You're but you've taken it to a very high level. The Prime Minister. Do you want to talk a bit about that as well? Because when I was reading this, I was just thinking, this is a risk-taking writer to the core. So you are painting characters who operate at high level in society, and you're taking the subject of incest there.
Mm-hmm. I make no apologies.
No, I'm not.
No apologies in the book. I think one of the reasons why I went to that level is to prove that this is not a street thing. This is not a poor people thing. It happens in the nicest of families. The more bougie, the better they're able to cover and hide and pay off and silence. But it is still there. It is still dark. It still needs to be brought to light. And a lot of folks who are at that level go through life without help because you're rich. What do you need help for? It's okay for the guy in the street to be doing this, but not for you. Come on, don't be silly. Take a vacation. You'll be fine. Go to Paris. Pack a bag. But the issues are still there.
Sure.
When you return.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's at every level of society.
It is.
Absolutely. Amazing. I mean, I was really, really bowled over by the step you took. Aliyyah, your book also uncovers, well, you know, in writing about love, in writing about family, in writing and setting it in Trinidad, already the conflict is just set up without having to try too hard. And in your characters living and loving in the yard, you also touch upon religion as a constraint, sex before marriage, marrying out, the real serious issue of relatives meddling in your affairs, which have long-term ramifications. So in your yard, Uncle Answer seriously has a lot to answer for, and he does apologize at the end. But could you talk a little bit about the darker side of love and family in your book?
So an abandoned boy is brought to live with this large extended family, and we try to figure out how they're going to deal with him. The grandmother already has her prejudices. You can only judge someone by who their parents are. You know, the boy is a stray. They downright accuse him of killing an old lady whose body was found with him. So he's brought into the family in this contentious way, and one of the brothers wishes to adopt him and bring him to live in the yard with the rest of them. And of course, the family members can't see eye to eye, and things get, you know, a little more wild when he eventually falls in love with one of these girls, Maya, who lives in the yard. And of course, the family does not appreciate that at all. And Maya eventually leaves him. But what I wanted to bring to the fore was exactly how the important role family plays for, you know, a young boy and girl growing up, how prejudices, how, you know, unnecessary opinions and how their own foolish behavior impacts the young ones. And eventually, you know, these young people, they break their own hearts and they move away. So
yes, they do. Yeah, I mean, in a way, it's one of the themes of this is love against the odds, and almost like, and also it's an authentic love story. It's a very unconventional love story. This is not quite love between siblings. It's love between an adopted sibling, which is allowed in Muslim law. And again, these two have to almost break their own hearts, and it's love against the odds. But in both your books, there's a new generation coming up. There's new growth coming up, isn't there? Oh, is that not, hello? How about now? Okay. So, yes, so love against the odds, very much something that you write about. You also you seem to be advocating for a softer approach to love.
yes, okay. So what I've seen, and this might be a bit contentious, but when I grew up in Trinidad as, you know, a Muslim person in my childhood, I didn't feel that I was Muslim. I was just part of a community, and in Trinidad we have a mix of races and religions and so on. So I didn't feel different. But now in the world and in Trinidad, there's a certain sense of religiousness with the younger generation. And I find that to be strange. I know why it has happened, but I find it to be strange because usually the younger generation is the more progressive, more forward-thinking. And I find this coming back to a very a limited way of viewing religion as a set of rules, and then you have groups like ISIS and so on coming back and implementing rules and laws that are totally absurd and calling it religion. But there is a certain religiousness among Muslims in Trinidad, and I wanted to show through, even though it's a love story, I wanted to show that, hey, you know, some of these rules are just absolutely ridiculous, and so not absolutely ridiculous, but absolutely ridiculous in the sense that you say things and you do things without fully understanding why you're saying them and why you're doing them, and you're causing a lot of problems, and you're hurting in this case, the younger generation, and you're hurting people and you don't understand the ramifications of your actions. And I just wanted to put that out there because a lot of times people in certain communities put religion above kindness and above loving and above, for instance, when this abandoned boy comes to live with his family, instead of, trying to treat with him as a kid in trouble, you're asking all these questions about, what is his faith? Did he kill this woman? And even though you know that he didn't kill this woman, obviously, and you're asking, who his parents are. He doesn't know who his parents are. And, some sections of the family just don't want him at all. So I just thought, putting compassion and love above any sort of, so-called religious dogma, was important.
Okay, yeah, and it really does come across in the book. It's a subtle critique of the arcane dogma versus how it just doesn't sit well with contemporary Trinidad in particular. I wanted to also ask you about your female characters, or your characters in general, because you've both written some very strong female characters, complex characters. There's a sort of a matriarchal society in the yard. We have Gloria, we have Hélène, we have Geneva, and they all feel like Trinidadian women that I know. So like you said, there's a sort of a DNA that you're drawing on. With both novels, I thought, I get these women, they are not aliens. And I wanted to ask you a very straightforward question. Do you both think that it takes women as writers to write good women? Does it take women writers to write really strong, credible, complex female characters in fiction? What do you think?
Well, it's a two-part thing. I think on one hand, yes, you would like to think that I, as a female writer, can write best about women. However, it behooves me to understand self. I need to understand what it is to be female, to be a Trinidadian female. And a lot of us don't. A lot of us buy into what we are told a woman should be, and deny self, deny the fullness of being female, everything that it encompasses. So I think on the one hand, yes, we will probably write better about women, but we need to understand ourselves before we even begin to take on that project.
Okay, so it's a kind of exercise in self-knowledge as much as anything else.
And you should not be able to come out of the other end of it without understanding more of yourself as you write these women.
Okay, what do you think?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Maya, my central female character, she is rebellious, she is fiery, no walls can contain her, and she is my rebellion. So I agree, you know yourself and you're sort of writing your experience and you come out knowing yourself a lot better at the end.
Okay. And do you think now is our time as female writers? Do you think we finally have more room to write the books we want to read? Do we finally have more agency in the canon? I mean, I'm sensing there's a boom happening. I mean, I also get some feedback that it's not okay to say there's a new wave of writing coming out of the Caribbean, whereas actually there are scores and scores, if not hundreds of women now writing, and that's very new. There's been a sort of an emergence of just dozens of female voices. What do you think?
I don't think we're waiting for approval or permission anymore. I think we're coming into our own and putting it out there that we have something to say. We've been silenced for quite some time by the culture, by the rules, unwritten or written, that the world has imposed on us. And I think we've busted through. It can't be stopped now.
I know. I mean, yes, I agree.
Yes.
And also people are getting around the whole problem with publishing in the region by self-publishing.
That's right.
By finding publishers outside of the region. And I'm going to talk about that towards the end.
Sure.
But what about you? Do you think it's our time now as women who write from Trinidad? What do you think?
Yes, and I think it's about time. And I'd like to see more writers talking about East Indian women as well in literature from Trinidad, because that's so rare. I'm trying to find writers who write on the topics that I explore, and it's a very rare find.
Tell me a little bit about your male characters as well, because there are lots of male characters in your book, but there are two that are so memorable. And one is Louis Maldonado, yes, and the other is Beirut. Can you tell me a bit about Louis Maldonado?
Louis does not play a huge part. By that, I mean
he's not active on the page.
He's not active on each page.
He's so memorable.
Yes, he's pivotal. He is sharp. He's like a scalpel with each scene that he appears in, and that's probably 2 or 3 scenes, if that, through the whole trilogy. In those 3 scenes, he slices. And when you move on, you're bleeding.
He's a powerful matriarch.
He's very, very powerful.
Where does he come from? Where does he come from again?
As a character, or in the dark places?
Yeah.
He's a boogeyman.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
He is the boogeyman that I've sort of put together on a page.
A Trinidadian boogeyman.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. Trini boogeyman.
Okay. And tell me about Beirut, because I haven't ever seen a character like him. In fact, your book is completely unique. I haven't read a book like yours ever. But Beirut, is it Beirut? Beirut. It's the lucky one in Arabic. He's a feral orphan. No one knows. He seems to be dredged up from the mud. Nobody knows who he is, or he doesn't even know who he is. And he yet evolves into the main lead, the main romantic lead. Can you tell me, where did you find Beirut? Who is he?
Well, firstly, from Heathcliff, Wuthering Heights. Like Heathcliff, we never find out where he's come from. Unlike Heathcliff, though, he does not turn out to be vengeful in any way. So he was a perfect person to, turn his family upside down, and to allow us to see the demons, of everyone around him, because they should have treated him so much better than they did. Yeah,
he's great. And he turns good in the end. I mean, he's sort of the mirror. He mirrors the family back.
Yeah.
And he doesn't really put a foot wrong, doesn't he? Does he? He's smart. He doesn't. Yeah, he's smart.
Yeah.
Natalie, I wanted to ask you about Carlton, Uncle Ken, because when I was reading them, I didn't recognize them as Trinidadian men, and I was thinking to myself, these do not ring. These are thinking men. These are new men. These are new Trinidadian men, and I wondered whether you were writing new men for us. What were you? I was thinking that they're very conscious, they're very thoughtful, they're full of insight, they're very perceptive. I don't mean to do any men in the audience down, but they felt like you were writing towards a new consciousness. Is that right? Tell me.
I like the men in my book. And I wanted to remind all of us, the men and women of Trinidad and Tobago, that there are good men here.
Sorry.
And I've met a few of them along the way. They are there, but they're not as loud and as in your face as the other type. And I just wanted, the book was not written just for women to read. A lot of my male readers will come to me and they say, oh, thank you for that. There are men who have a family, who nurture their family, who take care of business and are home. They know how to clean and cook and wash, and they look after. Now, we as a society tend to belittle that. For what reason, I have no idea. So I wanted in my books to remind us
of these good men.
Not all men are philanderers.
Yeah.
we do have good, handsome, loyal men. And they're in that trilogy. Trust me.
Yeah, we do. Finally, I'm just conscious of time. I wanted to talk a little bit about publishing, the sort of the business side of things, because there is a really interesting story here First of all, I want to talk a bit about the fact that we were talking about in the green room, that both of you are writing books in a way sort of fulfilling something that wasn't there, or putting on the shelf, or contributing to the canon, books that didn't exist before. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about that. Did you feel when you were writing these books that you were making space for yourself and putting your books, putting books on the shelf that just didn't exist?
I've never read anything like what I've written.
Yeah, me too.
I've never read anything like what
I agree,
Ali has
yeah.
written.
And
Yeah.
I have never read anything like what you've written, Nathalie. And I absolutely enjoyed Nathalie's book. I'm telling you.
Thank you.
It
Same
was
to you,
fabulous.
yes.
I read part 1 in 4 hours yesterday, and it was awesome. And the men are amazing.
Yeah.
Just say.
He writes good men and good sex.
Yes.
But I just wanted to say, if you could, so I've heard words like family saga, chick lit, literary romance, and yet these aren't words that really necessarily are good enough. And I would say these both feel like solid, homegrown Trinidadian writing by women.
Right,
I mean, is
right.
there any, if you had words to describe what you do, what would they be?
2 words: real fiction. There's nothing between those pages that you could say, that's not possible. Nothing. In fact, readers have said to me, but I know this family.
Yeah.
And they would look at the setting, and none of the settings were out of this world. It's on Tragrate Road, across from Laprousse, where the printery was. There's the Mass, there's Arapita Avenue. All the buttons that we have were mentioned.
Yeah.
The way everything was described. There's nothing there that is fiction in a way.
So it's fiction set in the real world.
Yeah.
It's a very
Yes.
vibrant, humming real world.
You'll find yourself reading and doing like this. Yeah.
What would you call? What would the name? What would you name? How would you name your? If you were to pitch yourself. I mean, I just actually we were sitting with an agent in the green room, and I was like, well, how would you pitch? How would you call your novels?
I have had, my publisher calls it a family saga. I call it a literary romance because it is literary fiction. It's not, commercial. But there's a commercial twist because there is that accessible love story.
Yeah.
So I will say literary romance, but then I would say that I really don't know how to define this book. And yeah, I can't say.
I think there's also has been a tradition where love, stroke sentimentality, is seen as not literary, is seen as sentimental, and sentimentality goes down the route of commerciality. It's just sort of, I know. If you write in the English canon, you just don't mention the word love. It's just too sentimental. So, which is a real pity because obviously there's so much conflict there. Just want to touch briefly on publishing. Nathalie, you self-publish.
Yes.
I also wanted to talk to you earlier about when you were weighing up the options to get your book out there. Can you talk a little bit about self-publishing and also, for example, Snapshots, which is on the shortlisted for the Bocas Prize, is the first,
Yes.
I think, Trinidadian or Caribbean publisher to get that high up, that kind of recognition. Obviously, we have a problem with there being very few publishers here, options, places to take our poetry, fiction, everything.
Right.
Can you talk a bit about self-publishing and how and why you got into it?
When I first started writing, I sent it to all the typical publishers, the Random Houses and so on, and I have rejection letter after rejection letter saying that, first of all, this is not going to sell. It's too niche. It's too ethnic. I don't know what the heck that means. And so my husband said to me, well, why don't you do it yourself? And I poo-pooed that idea. I mean, I have no idea how to publish a book. So I decided to learn. Everything's on the internet. So I learned how to format and paginate and do all the business of writing and put it out there, and it went nuts. Now, I'm surprised and disappointed that we don't have more publishers in the Caribbean region because there is so much talent here. For editors, for writers,
dozens of writers here,
this is huge. Mind you, when trying to market the book in Trinidad, I called several bookstores down here One shop said to me, Trinidadians don't read. I was
And a
floored.
bookshop said that?
A bookshop.
Somebody selling books is saying
Someone
that
selling
that
books.
the people who are buying books from them don't read them.
Don't read. So on my visit here, I decided I was going to visit that bookshop. And in the windows, there's Twilight, there's Harry Potter.
Yeah.
There was a tiny section in the back with Caribbean authors.
Yeah.
That's it's preposterous.
Yeah.
That should not happen. I think it should be the other way around, because when I'm in the US or Canada, I walk into a bookshop, there is Harry Potter, there is Twilight. They are promoting their own.
Their own
So
stuff, yeah. And so
aren't we people too?
Yeah, here was our own fiction is seen as niche, or even
right.
here.
Nobody's going to understand that.
Yeah.
The standard publishers said.
Yeah, but also, Aliyyah, tell me about your experience. Because I also wonder, it's a good, both of you are like role models for what's possible. Absolutely, no.
That's
But
scary.
Aliyyah, tell me your experience.
I'll be completely honest with you and say things that I probably shouldn't. But being completely honest with you, I was so in love with my own book that I thought it would be a bestseller. And no, I really was. But then when I started researching, okay, well, how do you get published? Because I wanted to have my books in bookstores around the world, and well, I certainly couldn't do that on my own. And so I started, you need to get an agent before you get a publisher, because a publisher will not look at your work. They would ask you to send a query and 3 sample chapters, to your agent. So I started looking at agents. There's a handbook that you can buy on Amazon with a list of agents and the type of work that they represent. And so I went through that handbook, and then I didn't know how to define my book. So anyone that represented literary fiction, romance, family saga. So I had an entire list. I sent my query and my 3 sample chapters to maybe 100 agents. Yes, 100 agents, because each agent would get 200 such queries in their inbox every day. So I'm not even sure if they're going to actually open this email. So I sent to 100 agents, and I got, just a lot of silence. Maybe 5 of them requested to see the full manuscript. I must have gotten about 80 rejection letters eventually. And people say you shouldn't say that you've gotten 80 rejection letters, but I should, because if I didn't persevere, then I wouldn't have gotten the book published. And everybody all writers get rejection letters. Even the best-selling writers are rejected constantly before they are eventually accepted. So I say that I've saved all my letters, and I intend to put them up at home where I can see them all the time, because I'm proud that I was brave enough to actually send the work out. So I got all my rejections, and then I started thinking to myself, I just cannot take it anymore. There's only so much rejection one person can take. So eventually I decided, you know what, I'm going to look, because those were US agents, and I said, you know what, I'm going to look at England, I'm going to look at India. And India actually was really positive for me, I think because maybe they identified with the East Indian story. And the publishers thought it was a Bollywood flick. And I started getting responses. And this woman, this agent that I queried, she said, well, I'm now a director at this publishing house. Will you publish with me? So I said, yes. So she says, well, come to India and I'll introduce you. And that was great for me as a first-time writer, because I didn't know how Trinidad would respond. And India is huge. And if she was willing to introduce me to, an entire country, or at least New Delhi, I was going to do that. And I did go, and they treated me very nicely, and they gave me a lot of publicity and stuff like that. My book didn't sell as a million copies like I thought it would sell.
Well, I'm just going to interrupt, because what is really great about both these books. I mean, Nathalie, you have a huge following, and you both I mean, I've seen your following on Goodreads. I've seen you both on Amazon. I've seen you have a lot of traction on social media.
Yes.
So, yes. So it's amazing to see what you've done,
Yes.
how brave you've been, how tenacious you've been, as somebody doing it
Right.
alone. I mean, you're actually
Yes.
selling a lot of books.
I am.
You have
Yes.
readers. You have a lot of
do.
readers. You have thousands
I
of
do.
readers.
I do.
Can you talk a little bit? I mean, yeah, we only have a couple of minutes, but I mean, is there anything, if you had advice for anybody out there who really, really wants to write, comes from Trinidad, having this conversation, we're miles away from the metropolis, what would your advice be?
Stay true to the passion of it. Your readers will always pick up on the fact that you're not genuine if you decide to slide. You have to be passionate about what you're doing, and they will feel it, and they will want more of it. If you're writing formula, you know, people will pick that up and lose interest quickly. And you have to be as invested in your readers as they are in you.
Yeah.
Yes, they're paying their money and they're buying your book. You need to put out the best you could. I mean, even if you have to open that vein and bleed all over the page, you need to be able to give back as much as your readers are giving to you in their love and support.
Sure.
Can I also add something to that?
What would your advice be?
I would not dissuade anyone from self-publishing their book, because you can land the biggest publisher, and by the time their next book comes around, they've forgotten you. You know, I mean, Amazon
I know
does.
that's true.
Amazon does a really, really good job for self-published authors in a certain way, in that they allow you to promote your book a lot. And you have a lot of author benefits.
Right.
And you can actually reach a community and build an audience. So while, yes, traditionally publishing has its strength, probably my next book, I will self-publish it, because you have those opportunities and you can do it, and you don't have to go through the stresses that I've been through before. And whether there's a big difference, I really don't
Well,
think
Aliyyah,
so.
I know of a very good self-publishing company that you may want to get a hold of.
Oh, okay, great.
But I mean, these days with the internet and social media, a writer who has something to say and is tenacious,
Yes.
you have a platform like you never did before, not even 5 years ago or 10. But I'm just conscious that our time is up. Time is up.
Aw.
And so what I would like to, both authors will be signing their books just past those windows. If you want to buy any of their books, they're for sale in the bookshops. So they'll be signing from now.
Well, I think I've only got a few copies that left
Okay,
out
so there are only a few copies left, so run. But for now, could you please put your hands together for Nathalie Taghaboni, Aliyyah Eniath.